Hi everybody, Jeremy Siskind here. I'm the author and arranger of solo standards for piano, playing solo jazz piano, and a whole big jazz piano fundamental series. 3 books out, available now, hundreds of pages, way too many pages. I am proud of my books, and I recommend them. Okay, today I want to show you the number one thing that I want my students to understand about voicings. It's if you can put this together, then you know what you need to know about voicings. Okay, and I want to show you how it works for the first for a few chords. So what I have here is a chart which lists 4 different kind of tones that we can have for different kinds of chords. And like I said, I truly feel if students really deeply understand this, then you can do a lot with voicings. If you don't understand this, you're going to end up with funky stuff for voicings. So let's talk about these categories first, and then we're going to go through some different essential chord types and talk about how this functions. Okay, so essential tones, as you might guess, I'll make myself bigger, you don't need to stare at that chart, are the notes that A, we really, really want in the chord, and B, we want to put in the sweet spot of the piano for hearing chords. And I call this, in my teaching, I call this the magic range. And it runs from C below middle C to the G above middle C. This is a rough estimate depending on your piano, depending on the night, depending on your preferences. You know, you might draw the border slightly differently. But we want to put our essential tones into the magic range here. So for instance, if I'm voicing a C major chord, the 3rd and the 7th are going to be the essential tones. And I'm one way or another going to put them within that magic range. Okay. So essential tones we really, really want in the chord, we want to put them in the magic range. And if I'm trying to identify a chord, just by a voicing, the first thing that I'm looking for is those essential tones, because those will really go far telling me what that chord is. The second thing is color tones. Color tones are optional, but they usually sound quite lovely. They make the chords sound richer. Then we have avoid tones, tones that we really should not be playing, that are going to create dissonance. These avoid tones are usually going to be a half step above the essential tones or color tones, basically half step above notes in the chord. I'm not going to list every single note that we need to avoid for every single chord because, we're often avoiding a lot of notes, but if there's any controversy or we're wondering, we'll talk about avoid tones. And then we have alter tones. These are tones that are commonly changed in order to be included in the chord. So let me show you how this chart would function, and let's start with a friendly old major 7th chord. And we'll take C major 7. So first thing is that, we know that we want the root one way or another has to be at the bottom. Either the bass player is playing it, maybe it's the pianist, we're playing it, maybe we're playing with a big band, I guess in that case the bass player's playing it, or we're playing with a tuba player, they're playing it. Somehow the root's probably got to be in there. Essential tones here, 3rd and 7th. Color tones. Let's see, I could write bigger, couldn't I? I've got this whole big chart. Let's make it nice and visually appealing. 3 and 7. Color tones, 5, 9, and 13. Avoid tones, the big one here is the 11th, right? The 11th in a major key is a half step above the 3rd, so we don't really want to use the 11th. But the most common, if we're going to change a major 7th chord at all, it's probably going to be that we're going to add the sharp 11th. I don't look at that as a normal part of the chord. That's going to change the character of the chord a bit, but this is a pretty commonly used note on major chords. I'm going to put in parentheses that probably the next most common note to include if we're going to add something to major chords is the sharp 5 or flat 6. So no matter what the context is, playing solo piano, playing with a vocalist, playing with a bass player, what I am going to be aiming for here is putting that 3rd and 7th in the magic range and then building around it with color tones. And it could be here, could be here. The whole thing could be moved up here. I could put some of the color tones in between the third and the seventh. If I'm playing with my right hand, like, these general rules don't change regardless of what kind of voicing you're playing. Now, this chart changes just slightly if you have a major sixth chord. So how is this chart going to change if it's a major sixth chord instead of a major seventh? So big change is that the essential tone becomes the sixth rather than the seventh. And what that means is that the 13th really isn't a color tone anymore because the 13th and the 6th are the same note. Sometimes in sixth chords, we can add the major seventh then as a color tone. You'll hear musicians do that. Nothing else here is really going to change. It's going to be really rare in a major sixth chord because that's like very tonal to add that sharp 11th. Not too common, but so I'm going to put that in parentheses, not completely impossible. And it's going to be really, really rare to add the sharp 5 because now we're kind of mandated to have the 6 in there. So we'll probably take that out. So this is the chart that I would use for a major sixth chord. Now it's the 3rd and the 6th are essential tones. The 5th and the 9th are color tones. 11th still an avoid tone. Maybe add a sharp 11th as a color tone, and maybe add the major 7th as, I said maybe add the sharp 11th as an alter tone, maybe add that major 7th as a color tone. So let's look at how that is going to function. So now I want E and A on my C major sixth chord, and then I can build around it with these two color tones, plus maybe if I'm feeling spicy, I'll add in that major 7th as a type of color tone. But maybe not. So not as many options there for the major sixth. Okay. I'm going to reset this chart and we're going to look at for a C minor 7th. How would we treat this? Okay, so the essential tones are now going to be the 3rd and the 7th. And of course, now they're the minor 3rd and minor 7th. Color tones are going to be the 5th, the 9th, and the 11th. Notice that we don't generally use the 13th as a color tone in minor 7th chords, at least, if it's going to be functioning as a 2 chord. We want to omit that note. So an avoid tone, the 13th is generally going to be an avoid tone here. Other than that, we don't want to play any wrong notes, but we're not going to do too much. Alter tones. I don't really think about having too many alter tones. Sometimes we might use a major 7th instead of the minor 7th. That's really changing the chord, but that is a different color that we could use. In some contexts, maybe we like to have a flat 6 in here. But these I would both put in parentheses. We're not going to do a lot of altering in most cases to a chord like a C minor 7 if we're thinking about it as like the 2 and a 2-5-1. So again, looking at building a voicing now, C minor 7, we're going to have E flat and B flat as our two essential tones, and anything we're going to do is going to be built around those notes. If I want to do a big cluster, they don't move. If I want to do a bigger voicing, they don't move. If I want to do a shout chorus, it's still based around having the 3rd and 7th in that magic range. Let's stick with minor chords for a second, and let's look at if we wanted to do a C minor 6th. Okay, just like we did a major 6th, it seems worthwhile to look at a C minor 6th. So now, as you could guess, the essential tones would be the 3rd and 6th. Common mistake is that people use the wrong 6th on minor chords. It should be the 6th from the major scale or from the melodic minor scale. So in C minor, it's going to be an A natural. Okay, color tones, 5th, 9th, 11th, all still totally good. And it's pretty common to add the major 7th when we have the 6th in here. Avoid tones, probably the minor seventh. You know, it's not going to sound very good against the sixth here. Altered tones. I have a hard time thinking of any altered tones that would work with this chord. So I got nothing in that category. Maybe somebody smarter than me has something to say. So C minor 6, again, E flat and A natural. We can build up. There's the 9th and 5th. Ooh, not that. Wow. If we want to add in those two other notes, the major 7th and the 11th, notice it's kind of like we have a G7 on top, right? We can build that chord up really beautifully. Okay, almost done here. You know, we could go on all day looking at different kinds of chords. I want to do 2 more for you, okay? Let's do 2 more. First obvious one is a C dominant 7th. We got to do that. Essential tones, 3rd and 7th. No change in there. Color tones, 5th, 9th, 13th. Avoid tones, the 11th is a half step above the 3rd. We want to definitely avoid it. And I'm just going to write in here that the major 7th is an avoid tone. That might be obvious, but we can play 10 out of the 12 pitches. So there's truly only 2 avoid tones here. And here we get to go hog wild with the altered tones, right? So we have the flat 9, we got the sharp 9, and then we have these 2 other tones that could be named 2 different ways: the sharp 11 or flat 5, and the flat 13 or sharp 5. So here, this is a really dense chart, right? This covers all 12 possible tones, and only 2 are actually avoid tones. Everything else is potentially fair game. Okay, last chord I want to show you because it's very interesting to me, and probably to you too, is a half diminished chord, right? Super important chord in jazz. We see a lot of half diminished chords. I don't think there's supposed to be a hyphen there. This is what happens when you write books, is you think a lot about where there's hyphens and where there's not. Okay, so essential tones, definitely the 3rd and the 7th. And here, those 2 notes will be the same as for a minor 7th chord, E flat and B flat in C. Color tones, flat 5 is the most important one. And this is where we stall. So actually, not quite yet. The 11th is definitely a good color tone. And here's the tough part, is the 9th. I would say that major 9th definitely works as a color tone. Minor 9th is a maybe. Let me write that better. Major 9th is a color tone. Minor 9th is a maybe. And then we often use the root. You know, it's not actually colorful here, but it's often a nice note to use where we would usually use a color tone in a half diminished chord. Avoid tones, we definitely don't want to play the natural 5. We definitely don't want to play a major 7th, and we don't usually play a 13th in a half diminished chord. So maybe these are self-explanatory, but 13th is something that we don't do it a lot. Altered tones, so here again we could think about the 9ths, and we could say that major 9th is kind of like an altered tone because it's not in the overall key. So for a half diminished chord, we're going to position the 3rd and 7th here. Flat 5, 11th, root could go on top. And if we want to, we could put in the major 9th. Now that minor 9th, this, I'm going to add it in parentheses to the avoid tones. Because depending on tempo and context, it might be just a terrible note to play. Or it might be nice to add as color. So that minor 9th could sometimes be a color tone and sometimes be an avoid tone. So maybe in some ways these charts are complicated and hard to remember, but to me, if you can keep these things straight in your mind, it's going to be a really good way to have a deep understanding of harmony and not just kind of memorize a bunch of stock voicings, but really know how to create voicings in different scenarios. I think that's really, really important. If you dug this kind of thing, you might dig my Jazz Piano Fundamentals series. Book 1 is for people who really haven't played jazz before. Book 2 is for people with some jazz experience looking to take it to the next level and really have a deeper understanding of voicings, minor keys, improvisation, stuff like that. Thank you for watching. If you watched this far, let me know by using the word chart in your comments. Thanks, everybody.